Thank you very much for having me. This is definitely a pleasure to be here. In particular, working with South African Olim, Goldfuss Insurance was founded by a South African Ole himself, Chaim Goldfuss, back in the 70s. So it is an honor to be part of this event. Today, like Tanya said, we'll be talking about health insurance in Israel, private health insurance. We're not going to focus so much on the Kupat Cholim, but more so we're going to focus on the private health insurance and the role that it plays in the health insurance system in Israel and how it interacts with the public system, etc. Now, with regard to questions, we'll try and get through to as many questions as possible. Tanya might ask some of the questions at the end, but you can always, at the end of the presentation, you'll have my contact information. You can always ask me more questions by emailing me. So if anything is missed, I apologize. I don't better get to everything, but feel free to then contact me at the end for any questions. So let's get into it. What I'll do is I'm going to share my screen so we can start the presentation. So just bear with me one moment. Okay. Okay. So basically what we're going to be talking about today again is unraveling the world of insurance, in particular health insurance. But let's get straight into it. What is insurance? Essentially, insurance is coverage by contract whereby one party undertakes to indemnify or guarantee another against loss by a specific contingency or peril. Okay, that's the official. Basically, we all know what insurance is. It's basically there to protect a risk if we are there, if there is a proposed risk. Okay, depending on what the situation is. Obviously, car insurance, home insurance, health insurance, all these different risks or all these different scenarios that pose a different risk. That's what insurance is for. Now, in Israel, it's important to understand that there are different categories of insurance. The first element of insurance is called elementary insurance. This is, generally speaking, the annual policies, and they cover the car insurances, home insurance, travel, business liability insurance. Those are the things that are insuring things, possessions, liabilities. They're, generally speaking, like I said, annual policies. That means that at the end of every year they renew, as opposed to the other policies that we'll be talking about, which are ongoing monthly policies for the life of the policy. The next category is life insurance, bituach chaim. Here, life insurance is split into a number of different categories as well. So you have the life insurance policies that are related to an individual, a person, life insurance, health insurance, long-term care, critical illness coverage, etc. Those are the insurances that affect an individual, a family member, etc. Okay, so that's one category of life insurance. The other category of life insurance that the Israeli industry categorizes is the pension planning. So pensions such as Keren Pensia, Bituach Menahalim, etc. That falls under life insurance. Keren Hishtalmut, which is essentially a savings fund provided by your employer in addition to you, and investments as well. But the main focus for today is going to be on private health insurance. Okay, so let's get straight into that. Basically, sorry, just one second. Basically, the public health system in Israel offers excellent coverage. It really is a very comprehensive coverage in the sense that it is a socialized system or a public system whereby we pay Bituach Leumi. By paying Bituach Leumi, okay, which is the National Insurance Institute, we're able to then access the main basket of healthcare, which is facilitated by one of the four Kupat Cholim, be it Maccabi, Leumi, Clalit, or Me'ochedet. Now, what happens is if we are working, that comes out of our paycheck, where part of our taxes or our payments towards the state is bituach leumi payments. So I might be paying a percentage of my salary towards bituach leumi. Somebody else will be paying a percentage of theirs. It may be less, but essentially we're all paying for each other's care. And what we're doing here is allowing everybody to access the main basket of healthcare. Okay, but what is the main basket of healthcare? What is it based on? So essentially, it's based on the National Health Insurance Law, and that basically means that the application is open to all residents in the country. Okay, residents, not necessarily citizens. And this is something that you might find in your Aliyah conversations, that you might be a returning resident, or you might be a returning citizen, or as I was an Ezrach Oleh, which basically means that my parents are Israeli, I had Israeli citizenship, but I still wasn't eligible to jump onto their health plan because I wasn't a resident, so there was an element of wait period, etc. Or if I came to Israel on a vacation, it didn't mean that I was absolutely going to be able to get service from the Kupat Cholim. So it's applicable to residents as opposed to citizens, so it's an important distinction to make. You can choose which fund you want to sign up with. They can't deny any pre-existing medical conditions. So that's something that's important to keep in mind, that the public system will cover you within the main basket, irrespective of age, health status, etc. Okay? Essentially, it's available to everybody. Everybody has access to the public health system, in addition that they are a resident of the country. So essentially what we're talking about here is, if it's such a comprehensive coverage, why is there still the need for health insurance? So even more so, the Kupat Cholim have their supplementary baskets too. Okay, it's called Shaban, Shirutei Briut Nosafim. The Shaban component basically takes the main basket of healthcare and adds to it. Basically, they add to that the ability to see a specialist using their network of doctors. It gives the ability to have a private surgery using their network of doctors, but up until a certain point, which we'll get to a little bit later on in the lecture. It allows you to have certain coverage for dental through the Kupat Cholim, or discounts on opticians through the Kupat Cholim. But again, it's through the network of the Kupat Cholim that you've chosen to work with. So the idea is that, yes, this is supplementary, okay, to the main basket. It is a very good addition to the main basket. However, there's still going to be limitations as to what it's going to cover you, okay? So it is a very good and comprehensive policy, but then what are the limitations? The limitations basically come down to two elements. Number one, the Kupat Cholim is an agreement, okay? They can choose how they're going to cover you, okay? They can change the rules of the game as they please, okay? As they please, obviously within regulation, within conditions, but there is that element of their ability to change the way in which how the policy looks and how much they'll be covering you for. As well as that, it's government regulated in the sense that it must comply with the law. There are certain limitations as a result of that where they can't provide full coverage. So what's missing? What's missing are basically the three following. This is the main essence of the private insurance policies, where they fill the gap of where the Kupat Cholim are falling short. So where's the first element? On medicines not included in the government health basket. Transplants coverage and surgeries coverage on a private basis, be it in Israel or abroad. Okay, so those are the three main limitations, which we're going to go into those in more depth in just a few minutes. But again, it's the medicines not covered by the government health basket. The Kupat Cholim must cover what's in the government health basket, but not necessarily what's outside of it. Transplants and surgeries. So medicines not included in the government health basket. This was an article from 2015 regarding the health basket of 2016, the approved health basket of 2016. There was updates since then, but again, it gives you the same idea. Now here, essentially, what you're looking at is a budget of only 300 million shekel allocated to extend the 2016 health basket. What that means is that we might have a budget of 300 million, which sounds like a lot, but when you have a shopping list of 2 billion shekel, you're obviously going to fall short. And that's where there's going to be limitations as to how far you can actually extend that coverage, okay? So what I've got here is a little clip just to give you some an idea as to the role of the health basket. I'm going to play it. If you don't hear it, I'll translate it afterwards. It's going to be in Hebrew, but I'll give you the general idea as to what this is talking about.
כתבתנו לענייני בריאות רחלי אפרים הכינה כתבה על חולים שממתינים להכרעות של חברי ועדת הסל. בואו נראה את הכתבה. לא נתנו לו שום סיכוי, פשוט אמרו לו לחכות לנס או למשהו אחר שיקרה. פיני לנמן, בן 58, כבר הרגיש את הסוף. הוא חולה זה 6 שנים בלוקמיה כרונית, סוג של סרטן הדם. אילולא היה מגלה את תרופת האימברוטינית בפברואר שעבר, היום לא היה משוחח עמנו.
הייתי מקבל בין 4 ל-6 מנות דם בשבוע, עשרות מנות דם. המוגלובין שלי לא התרומם מעל 7.5. הייתי חלש, הייתי כל הזמן במצב מאוזן, הייתי שוכב או יושב. ממש תרופת פלא. וזה שינה את חיי, אני עד היום מקבל את זה.
כ-150 חולים נזקקים לתרופה זו בכל שנה, כך טוענים הרופאים. עלותה כ-60,000 שקלים בחודש, ועכשיו היא עומדת להיכנס לסל התרופות.
התרופה הזאת היא תרופה מצילת חיים, היא חוסכת אשפוזים, היא חוסכת טיפולים אינטנסיביים על ידי השתלות מהחצם, או טיפולים שדורשים אשפוזים ארוכים.
So basically, what that clip was showing you was Penny, the guy who we were meeting in that report, had a very rare form of chronic leukemia. He was on about 15 units of blood a week, and he was very, very weak throughout his daily life. Essentially, the drug that he needed was costing 60,000 shekel a month because it was not included in the government health basket. The doctor that spoke at the end was explaining how it alleviates a lot of treatments and allows somebody to come back to somewhat of a normal life. However, it's very expensive. So either by having it included, they were petitioning the government to include this drug into the government health basket. Only because it's rare, there are many people that it doesn't apply to. So if it doesn't apply to them, you have the ethics committee, the committee that decides which drugs to go into it, to say, okay, and that's comprised of doctors and rabbis and ethical professors or whatever it might be, that is part of that committee to determine which drugs do enter it. Because if you've got a limited budget, you must decide, will it be this drug that we're going to add to save or to help 150 people, or this drug which is going to help 1,000 people. So here was 60,000 shekel a month in that treatment. Penny did have coverage from private insurance. He didn't mention that, but we are familiar with the case from the insurance companies that we work with. And he was a client of one of the insurance companies where they were paying 60,000 shekel a month for him to be able to use that drug and continue in somewhat of a regular life. That drug may have been added to the government health basket. If not, those without the private insurance may not be able to have access to that unless they're paying out of pocket. The alternative is by having the private policy, you are able to access it. So that's the advantage of, or the disadvantage of the drugs not including the government health basket, the advantage of the private policies and where they fill that very important gap. The private policies also cover off-label medications that could be effective treatments for other conditions. So even though it may not necessarily be specifically for that condition, off-label drugs can be covered as well. In addition, certain extensions, you can have experimental drugs included in that coverage too. Next, we get to transplants. This is an idea that is kind of it's something that shows you the excessive need for this additional coverage through the private policies. Essentially, the transplants that exist in Israel, there is a committee that determines who has access to what drugs are available. transplants are available, who is on the waiting list. There's an eligibility process as to what and who can receive a transplant. So here is a chart from 2012, albeit already a few years old, but it does give you a clear picture where the yellow, or the bright yellow, the orange is the population in Israel. The brown is the number of people that have registered as donor, ADI donor card, organ donors. Okay, ADI is the organization that facilitates the organ transplant donors. As in, if somebody wants to register as a donor, they have to register with ADI. And as you can see, in 2012, with a population of close to 8 million shekel, only about 700,000 people were registered as organ donors in the country. The next slide really shows you what's kind of shocking, and that is the number of people that were waiting for a transplant. So in 2010, you had 690 people waiting for a kidney transplant, 151 waiting for a liver transplant, 133 for a heart transplant, etc., etc. Okay, and in 2013, you see here the numbers grow at 755 waiting for a kidney transplant, 164 waiting for a liver transplant, etc., etc. Now, as you can see over here, in 2013, there was 1,114 people waiting for a transplant. Those transplants, how many transplants were actually achieved or actually performed? 392. Out of those who passed away as a result of waiting, 147. Okay, so you can see here that there is, while there is a government system that does allow for some people to get the transplants, there is a large gap there. Essentially what happens is that the insurance companies turn to legitimate companies abroad and allow you to receive an organ, either bringing the organ to you or taking you to the organ to have the surgery covered. Medical flights are covered by the private insurance companies. The idea is that it eliminates the eligibility process, the long process to get that acceptance to enter into the transplant wait period. So that's something that is very important as a feature that is somewhat lacking. Yes, there is a partial solution through the Kupat Cholim, but this gives a more comprehensive solution for that catastrophic scenario of a need of a transplant where you might not have access to it. The next is the private surgeries coverage in Israel. Now, the private surgeries coverage in Israel essentially is giving you a range of extras above the Kupat Cholim. Okay, so what I've put there is surgeries abroad, Mashlim Shaban, and from the first shekel. Now, surgeries abroad, that means that even if the surgery is available in Israel, you can choose to have a surgery abroad and it will be covered by the policy. It doesn't replace travel insurance, but rather you need pre-approval from the insurance company to be able to access that surgery, okay? And essentially, the insurance company will cover the surgery abroad, possibly not the accommodation before and after, possibly not the flight. It really depends on the situation, on the surgery, the type of surgery that's being done. But the surgery itself, the hospitalization during surgery will be covered. Okay. Then you have Mashlim Shaban and from the first shekel. Let's understand what that means. Mashlim Shaban basically means in cooperation with the Kupat Cholim, okay, or making up the difference of what the Kupat Cholim doesn't cover. If you remember, Shaban, like I defined earlier in the presentation, was referring to the Shirotei Briut Nosafim of the Kupat Cholim, the extended coverage. And I mentioned there that the Kupat Cholim would cover a private surgery up until a certain limit, okay, on condition that it's within a doctor from their network. So Mashlim Shaban basically does the following. It takes the cost of the surgery, okay, and it says, okay, you're doing the surgery. Let's take a gallbladder, a removal of a gallbladder. Let's say that costs 15,000 shekel. Let's say that the Kupat Cholim, using the doctor, a private doctor through the Kupat Cholim, will cover you for 80% of that surgery, okay? The insurance company, by taking a policy of Mashlim Shaban, will make up the difference of what the Kupat Cholim doesn't cover. So essentially, it'll make up the difference of that 20% to make you financially whole. The idea behind this policy specifically comes from the regulator, where the insurance companies weren't always offering this, but the regulator, the controller of insurance, came along and said, this is already covered partially by the Kupat Cholim. We don't want the consumer to be paying twice for the same thing. So you must offer this option where they are covering the difference of what the Kupat Cholim doesn't cover. Yes, there's going to be more bureaucracy. Why more bureaucracy? Because first and foremost, you must turn to the Kupat Cholim, okay? Receive the coverage from the Kupat Cholim, and only then you can turn to the private policy to see what the difference that they'll make. At the end of the day, they're going to be covering what the Kupat Cholim doesn't cover. So where's the bureaucracy there? Number one, you have to find, you have to make sure that the Kupat Cholim will cover you for that private policy, for that private surgery. And then once you've paid that, or you've received the confirmation as to what they've paid, you then turn to the Kupat Cholim and ask them for that. Under the new policies and the new regulations since 2016, the policies dictate that you must use a participating surgeon with the insurance company. So that's another semi-roadblock in the process, in the sense that the doctor that you're using through the Kupat Cholim, in order to get reimbursed for the difference, okay, the doctor must also be participating with the private insurance company. So it might be that you found Dr. Cohen. Dr. Cohen works with the Kupat Cholim and also works with the private insurance company. Fantastic, you get 100% back. Dr. Levy might work with the Kupat Cholim, but doesn't work with the private insurance company. So there, the private insurance company won't pay anything out because they don't have an agreement with Dr. Levy. Then let's change the names and go to Dr. Jones. Dr. Jones does not work with the Kupat Cholim, but does work with the private insurance company. In a scenario like that, because it's Mashlim Shaban makes up the difference of what the Kupat Cholim doesn't cover, the insurance company should cover 100% of Dr. Jones's expenses. Because the Kupat Cholim contributed 0, they have to make up the difference, and that's the difference. And then you have Dr. Smith that doesn't work with the Kupat Cholim, doesn't work with the private insurance company. There, you will get no coverage for a surgery with Dr. Smith. So that's the idea of using of the Mashlim Shaban private surgeries coverage. That's one option. The second option is covering from the first shekel. From the first shekel is relatively self-explanatory in the sense that there's no participation of the Kupat Cholim. You effectively bypass the Kupat Cholim, thereby choosing a doctor from the participating list of surgeons with the insurance company and having it covered in full. Because it's an agreement, there's no capped amounts, that's agreement between the insurance company and the surgeon, and there's no involvement of bureaucracy or extra bureaucracy of getting the approval from the Kupat Cholim as well. So here, if the doctor is participating, you have the coverage. If they're not participating, you don't have the coverage. And that's basically considered to be a more comprehensive option because of the lack of bureaucracy involved. But in addition, it's going to be a more expensive policy as well. So it's important that you understand the differences between the options, and you need to understand that before purchasing the policy, the idea being that you don't choose which option to claim off of at the time of the claim, but rather when you purchase the policy. What that means is that when you purchase the policy, the premium is based on the type of program you're going to, or coverage you're going to be purchasing. So therefore, the Mashlim Shaban premium is going to be lower. The first shekel coverage is going to be more expensive, and therefore that's what's going to carry you. Now you can switch between them. The insurance companies may require new health information, but that we'll get to as well. But again, there is a process to switch them in that sense. There are some companies, going back to the Mashlim Shaban, there are some companies that will cover, that will offer a policy of a deductible or a service charge, essentially, of 3,000 shekel, where rather than you dealing with the bureaucracy for the 3,000 shekel, they'll deal with the bureaucracy in your stead. That's something that comes down to figuring out what your insurance philosophy is and what you're prepared to cover, not cover, whether you're prepared to pay a 3,000 shekel deductible for a situation like that or to try and deal with it on your own. But that's an individual decision, obviously. There's no right or wrong answer. Now, that covers the main elements of the policy. So that's medicines not included in the government health basket. That's the transplants coverage and the surgeries coverage. Then we go to the optional riders. I'm not going to go into too much depth here because this can be, and there are different variations of these extensions. And these are the important and also nice to have coverages, but they're not necessarily essential elements of cover. What I mean by that is as follows. You've got the ambulatory coverage. A common misunderstanding is that the ambulatory cover is covering ambulances. That's not the case. It essentially covers the idea of outpatient type services. What that means is consultations with specialists on a private basis, diagnostic testing on a private basis, physiotherapy treatments, pregnancy packages, managers' health check is what some of them call it, where they do a full physical once every 2 years, early cancer detection. Depending on the company, they'll include different features into their ambulatory coverage. But the idea behind the ambulatory coverage is that it covers the day-to-day type of things that may not be the medicines not including the government health basket or the transplants or the surgeries, but rather the consultations and the testing. And as a result of that, even though it's not the essence of the coverage, because a lot of it is covered by the Kupat Cholim, it's in addition to it. We see that as supplementary over and above the Kupat Cholim, which basically it, what's the word I'm looking for? Amplifies or gives extra coverage and extension on what you're already getting from the Kupat Cholim. You also have this option here. Okay, the advantage of the ambulatory coverage through the private policies is that it doesn't limit you necessarily to the network of doctors that the Kupat Cholim will use, or similarly to the surgeries coverage on the private policies, where you're required to have choose a doctor from a participating list of surgeons. On the ambulatory coverage, it's not limited to a participating list. You can go to any specialist of your choice to have a consultation. So that's actually one of the policies or one of the elements of the coverage that is claimed off of the most, because it is one of those coverages that is very broad in what it does offer. So it is important. There are different limitations here depending on the insurance company. So some companies might offer limited of, let's say, 4 consultations a year. Others might give you a budget of 11,000 shekel and use it however you will, be it diagnostic testing or consultations. So it's important to have those checks and do those checks before you enter in a policy to see what's important to you. Extended medicines coverage. So as I was saying earlier, for the experimental medications, that's what the extended medicines coverage is referring to. There are some policies that will have it built into the standard medicines coverage. That some companies will do that. Others will have a separate extension where the extension will effectively give you access to experimental medication or lower deductibles or customized medications. And that's something that, again, is an additional premium. You might have to decide whether or not it's going to be worth your while to do that. But we do often recommend that people add that if it's available and within your budget for their health insurance policy. Alternative medicines coverage. This gives you an additional coverage for acupuncture, chiropractics, homeopathy, osteopathy, things like that. That's if you're into it, then it's a good coverage for you. It can give you X amount of elements of coverage, as in X amount of consultations a year. They're capped as to how much they're going to cover you for. Some companies have now started working with only specific service providers. So if this is an important element to you, it is important to double check what that means to you and whether or not it's worth your while. Some of those service providers may or may not provide service in English. So if that's a deal breaker for you, it may not necessarily be worth your while to enter into a policy. Again, it's nice to have, it's important to understand the terms so there's no mismanagement of expectations. Rapid cancer detection, that's another feature, or rapid diagnosis as well, as a general rule, where you can turn to one of the private hospitals and they do a whole battery of tests that allow you to do a rapid diagnosis rather than going through the public system. Again, it's nice to have. There are deductibles involved. They do limit you to specific hospitals. So if that is a hospital in Ramat Aviv, or if it's a hospital in Herzliya Medical Center, if you're in Beersheba, you will have to travel to those hospitals to be able to access that coverage. Case management coverage. There are a number of companies now that are offering the case management coverage, and that is basically looking at your medical file or a specific diagnosis and then trying to determine what the best course of action would be before proceeding and giving you with a panel of experts to determine what it is that your next course of action should be. The last one there is critical illness coverage. It's not really a rider or an extension, but rather a policy of itself. I put it in the riders because it's important to touch on it, but it's a whole conversation within itself as well. The idea of critical illness coverage, which I believe in South Africa you refer to dreaded diseases coverage, basically covers you for up to 41 critical illnesses, where the family would then get a lump sum, or the individual would get a lump sum payout to do with that money whatever it is that you want. The idea of that is that it's supposed to relieve financial burden on the family. That, you know, if somebody's out sick, yes, they might have sick days from their employer, but that only, you know, will be valid for a number of days or a number of months. Okay, you may not be disabled, so it may not fall under the category of disability coverage. So if someone is out sick in hospital for a long extended period of time, this money can relieve financial burden to the family by the fact that you're not going to be in the office, you're not going to be working, you're not going to be out in the field doing whatever it is that you do on the regular basis to bring in that income. And even more so, okay, Shelo neda, as they say, God forbid a child becomes ill. I know that if God forbid one of my children become ill, either me or my wife would be by their bedside 24/7. That means loss of income from me because, or from my wife, because we wouldn't be working the same hours that we'd be working. So this is something that is very important to understand what is covered in the policy, okay? What critical illnesses are covered and the role and the function that this plays. Some people say, you know what, I've got the liquid funds, I don't need it, it's not relevant to me. Others say, I wouldn't be able to live without it, this is an essential one. So it is important to consider that when you're considering health insurance in general. It can be considered on its own, it can be considered part of a life insurance policy, but this is something that is not covered by the Kupat Cholim in any way, and that's why I do believe that it is important to mention this and definitely consider the option when looking at the bigger picture of a health insurance package. Now we get to the underwriting. Possible underwriting is as follows. Like every health insurance policy in Israel, there is a health declaration. What that means is that there's a series of questions. Do you suffer from? Have you ever suffered from? And in Israel, they ask, have you ever suffered from? Not have you suffered from in the past 10 years, okay? They look at the medical history. In addition, do you suffer from, let's take, for example, cholesterol. Somebody says, well, my cholesterol is normal because I take medication. The answer to that question is yes, I suffer from cholesterol because if I didn't take the medication, I would have high levels of cholesterol. So that's something that would have to be reported. And we answer the questions of the health declaration as they need to be, as they're asked. And it's important to give that full information when giving a health declaration, because essentially what happens is that if it's not listed, the insurance company cannot underwrite it. And in the event of a claim, that can cause problems. And I'll give an example after I go over the potential outcomes. But essentially, an insurance company might look at the underwriting. And this is true for health insurance or life insurance, for example. They might look at your medical history and they'll say, you know what, this is fine, doesn't bother us, regular terms and conditions. Where could this happen? Take life insurance. Somebody had reported that they had a knee reconstruction 20 years ago. That doesn't affect life insurance. From my knowledge, no one's ever died from a knee reconstruction, okay? Or the need to have a knee reconstruction. So as a result, it doesn't have an impact on life insurance, and therefore regular terms and conditions. But on health insurance, that knee would be excluded from coverage, okay? Why? It would be excluded from the surgeries coverage because it's considered to be a pre-existing condition. So that's where the exclusion of a pre-existing condition may come into play. You might have somebody who's got diabetes. As a result of the diabetes, you can't necessarily exclude that condition from all elements of cover because surgeries coverage is based on that it can affect different organs in the body, diabetes. Now, you might be able to exclude it as a pre-existing condition from medicines coverage, but it might be also fall under an exclusion and transplants coverage, and they may exclude the kidneys as a result because it can have a direct effect. But on the surgeries coverage, you might have an increased premium because there's an increased risk by the fact that you have an illness like that. And that may cause your premiums to go up, even if it is covered under the policy. Okay, so that's another way in which a policy could underwrite. Obviously, in a worst case scenario, you have a rejection of the application. That's if you have a whole range of illnesses where the insurance company may not be willing to take on that risk at all. And therefore, they just say, listen, no coverage. So it really does depend on what the underwriting outcomes might look like. Here, you don't have the choice. The insurance company chooses what the underwriting process will look like or what their decision will be. You can't really negotiate to say, listen, let me pay a higher premium so that I can have the cover. It's a risk analysis that the insurance company does to determine whether or not they want to take on that risk. So that's the underwriting. Now, why is it important to give a full and honest health declaration? Number one, you need to give a full and honest health declaration. That's the whole purpose of the health declaration. But, we've had a scenario where one of our clients said, I had back surgery 10 years ago. I don't want to declare it. To which I said, you need to declare it. The insurance company must know about it. They said, no, I don't want to declare it. It's a non-issue for me anymore. It shouldn't be declared. To which I responded, even if we don't declare it, in the event of a claim, we're going to give the full medical history to our doctor. The surgeon is going to write down that you had a history of back issues in the past. As a result, that paperwork is submitted for the claim. Once there's a claim, the insurance company is going to look at the paperwork. They're going to see that there was a history of back issues. They're going to then refer back to the policy and when it started, and they'll see whether or not this condition was a pre-existing condition from before the policy started or not. Based on all that information, they'll determine whether or not they're going to cover the claim. So even if we don't declare it today, they can still not cover it in the future if it was something that should have been declared and wasn't declared. So that's very important to give a very full and comprehensive health declaration. Okay, well, obviously within the way in which the questions are being asked and the information that the insurance company is looking for. Now I've just got some life insurance and health insurance tips for Olim. Okay, a few things to just be aware of ahead of time. Number one, there are fewer health insurance options for those age 69 and above. Basically what that means is that the health policies, a lot of the insurance companies have a maximum entry age of either 69 or 70. Once you cross that level, you only have one or two options available. This is something that you need to be to consider, that if you if you're applying and you're on the cusp, it's important to make sure that you act quickly if this is an important coverage for you. So be aware of that and just keep an eye on the clock. The other option is that there is that other company, like I was mentioning, that does have a maximum entry age of 85. It's fine. You do have coverage options still, but you're limited to one insurance company as opposed to a range of insurance companies that are available to you. Life insurance, I'm going to just touch on life insurance tips as well because it falls under the similar category, but life insurance policies in Israel don't have a cash value or a paid up value. They are term policies only. What that basically means is if you have a policy from South Africa or the UK or wherever it is that you're coming from, it's important to check whether or not the policy will cover you in Israel, and that's the next point as well, to check whether your existing policy will cover you in Israel for all scenarios and in any part of Israel as well, because some insurance companies may limit you as a result of that. But as well as that, if you have a whole life policy, if they exist where you're coming from, it may be worthwhile holding on to those policies until you set something up here. If it's relevant, don't cancel anything until you've set up something as an alternative in Israel and you've received approval. Remember to bring any recent medical documentation from specialists, especially relating to any pre-existing conditions. That's something that's very important because that can just delay the underwriting process. And again, if you're on the cusp of a maximum entry age, you don't want to delay the process. So it's important to just make sure you bring all the relevant information with you and everything be kept in order. Returning residents who are not eligible for Kupat Cholim, there is a temporary policy that you can purchase, a short-term policy. It's very limited to about $100,000 of coverage, does not cover pre-existing conditions. So there is a solution. It's not the best solution, but it's the only one that we have available to offer as a general rule for returning residents. In terms of long-term care policies, those are not available in Israel at the moment. They were taken off the market a while ago. So it is something that if you do have a long-term care policy, it may be worthwhile to hold on to those policies, at least for the short term, until you can determine whether or not it's worth maintaining. And obviously check that it will cover you in Israel. So that's basically the idea behind health insurance in Israel, the private health insurance industry in Israel. If you have any questions, you can feel free to contact me here on this email address. But Tanya, do we have any questions, or do you want to open it up for questions?
We have time for questions, so you can either ask or write in the chat. We have a few minutes to answer questions.
Let me see. Okay. I'm going to stop the share for a minute. Sorry. Can you pop? Okay, I'm not sure which slide it was that you were looking for, so we can have a look at that. Is it possible to obtain legal expenses insurance in Israel? With regard to health insurance, there's no real legal expenses. There's no real legal expenses when it comes to the to health insurance, but as a general rule, depending on how your policy is built, if we're talking about where it can come into effect, so that might be under liability insurances if it's as a result of a car accident or a home policy or a professional liability. A lot of the times liability insurances can cover legal costs as well. May just be legal assistance for you to represent yourself, but it's not something that is a specific legal expense policy in Israel. That's something that would have to look in on a more individual basis. There's another question: is rheumatoid arthritis a condition? Rheumatoid arthritis would be considered a pre-existing condition.
Someone's asking. Okay. Carry on. Sorry.
And that's something that you would have to declare. What is the cost of private health insurance cover? The cost of private health insurance cover, the answer to that is how long is a piece of string, right? Now you have limits on either side, but essentially it really depends on what level of coverage you're looking to cover yourself for. What that basically means is you can customize the policy to fit in however it is that you want to do it. So you have the base elements of cover. You've got the medicines, transplants, and private surgeries in Israel. Okay, so the idea of the medicines, transplants, private surgeries in Israel, that's the base coverage. You need to have at least one of those to be able to buy any of the riders that we spoke about as well, because that's the base coverage. Now the idea is that it could be as low as 10 shekel a month for just the transplants coverage, and for a very comprehensive policy, depending on age, it could be there of around 600 to 700 shekel a month for a very full comprehensive package in the most expensive age bracket, where they usually peak at age 66 plus. So for kids, a policy might look about 40 shekel a month. For young to middle-aged adults, you're looking between 100 to 200 shekel a month. And as you get older in the age brackets, it does go up. But like I said, from age 66 plus, you get to about anywhere between depending on the package, but let's say on average between 300 to 700 shekel a month. Again, depending on how comprehensive a policy you're looking to get. Okay. I hope that was a question for someone there. I hope that gives you the basic idea of a policy. But again, I can give you a more detailed explanation of the costing once we have real details. So if you want to email me with your age brackets, etc., then I can give you a more specific costing for that. What about special needs with adult dependents? So people with special needs, the insurance policy will relate to the special needs in its own specific scenario. So what that means is that if somebody, for example, has autism, then the insurance company may relate to the autism specifically, okay? They will underwrite according to what it means. Just because somebody might have autism doesn't mean they're going to have a whole range of other medical issues. That said, Down syndrome could lead to a whole range of other medical issues because it does affect a number of different elements in the body. So it really is case by case about the special needs. If they need any adult dependence, that's not something that's going to be covered. If they need any extra assistance, it's basically the health insurance policy that we're looking at and that we're discussing is very much a surgeries, medicines, transplants coverage. The extras are nice to have, like I said. The coverage for the long-term care, like I said, doesn't exist anymore. So the coverage for the extra cash available for that doesn't really apply. But as a general rule, even if it would apply, and even if the long-term care policy was available, whatever the special need might be, or whatever the issue might be, the insurance company would more than likely exclude that condition from the coverage. The insurance companies, again, they're not the Kupat Cholim. The Kupat Cholim do have to cover all the pre-existing medical conditions. The private insurance companies don't have to. So that's why there is that underwriting process there.
Renan, can you mention that the private medical insurance can also help with shortening the waiting period for specialists?
Right.
You know, for example, if you, yeah.
Okay, so that's a good point. And again, this is something that needs to just have a bit of management of expectations in this sense. What that means is as follows. When you've got if you need to see a specialist with the Kupat Cholim, if there's a specialist that's working through the public system, it may be 3 months, 6 months before you can have a consultation with that specialist. The private policy, however, will allow you, because you can choose a doctor, irrespective of whether they're with the participating or whether they're participating with the insurance company or whether they're in the network of the Kupat Cholim, you have the option to choose whichever doctor you want to see. So where can it help you? If you're seeing them on a private basis, the doctors might give you more availability for private consultations. At the end of the day, they're making more money as a result of that. So the private policies allow you the access to have the private consultation. Now, again, you can make a private consultation on your own. You can approach the doctor, make an appointment, and pay 1,000 shekel for that consultation. That said, the private policy will give you a reimbursement of up to 80%, but no more than a capped amount. In some companies, that might be 600 shekel. In other companies, it might be 800 shekel. But the idea is that you can get money back. Now, that can speed up the process because it means that you're able to access the larger availability that the specialist has because they want to have that consultation on a private basis. All that said, and this is to manage the expectations, the private policy can't guarantee a faster consultation. It gives you the funding or the reimbursement to be able to do that. However, if the doctor is in high demand, and doesn't matter if you come with a briefcase filled with cash, if the doctor is in a high demand and the wait list is 6 months, even on a private basis, then that's the situation. I experienced it myself recently where I had to see a specialist and someone had referred me on to one doctor, and then they said, you should go see another doctor as well. Try that doctor first. I said, why that doctor first? They said, because there's more available. So I called up and I asked for the first doctor, let's call him Dr. Cohen. And Dr. Cohen had a wait period, even on the private basis, of 3 months. The Dr. Levy, however, alternative, I called up and he had availability 2 weeks later. Now, he wasn't any less quality than the other doctor. It's just someone who is more popular for whatever reason for a consultation. But you do have the availability, and you can't guarantee that somebody who has a private policy will be able to see someone faster. It depends on the availability of the doctor as well. But it can absolutely help. Are there any other questions?
Okay, I think that's it.
No problem.
Thank you so much, Ronen.
No problem. I'll put my slide back up for the contact
Yes, please
information.
do.
Just so everybody can take that down again if they haven't already. So let me just put that up for you. Hang on.
And I can send everyone the recording of today's webinar in case you missed something or you want to send it to someone. I'll send the recording. Okay.
And if you want to ask any questions, there's my
picture of this.
Yep. And feel free to contact me, and I'll be happy to give you any more insight. What's important to just send me as well is, you know, a bit of a story about who you are when you're planning on making Aliyah, because some of that can influence when you know what options might be available to you, and go into a more in-depth conversation.
Okay, thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you, Tanya. Thank you to everyone, and thank you everyone for listening. I hope you found it informative.
Thank you.